Is it more reasonable for me to believe that this complex I, which puts that camera to shame, self-assembled by luck? Or is it more reasonable to believe that behind the complexity of this I, it's more reasonable for me to believe there's an
Do you
intelligent...
believe that love is a gift from God, or it comes from God such as conscience would?
If there is no God, you don't have free will. You're just a biochemical reaction, and you're just responding to the influences of your environment. My experience of life is love is real. I can love you or I can hate you. I can work for your well-being or I can seek to manipulate you and use you.
I would disagree with
Okay.
it and insist that even if love is a biochemical reaction,
Right.
it can still obtain free will because, although possibly evolutionary it may have arisen, in the current modern era, now that we live rather than survive as humans, we can make our own cognitive decisions to love who we decide and not love who we decide not to.
First point. If there is no God, we're limiting reality. We're limiting reality to matter and energy. There's no God, meaning by that, there's no personal being that pre-existed the human being. So all of reality is matter and energy. And my point is that if that's true, if all of reality is matter and energy, there is no such thing as love. There's a biochemical response that we might call love, but there is no free decision that I make to care for him, to forgive him, to help him. Instead, I am programmed by my chemicals, which means if I kick his face in, it's not me, it's just my biochemical reaction led me to kick his face in. And if I, quote, love him and am generous to him, there's not a me who's freely choosing that. I just have a biochemical reaction, influences of my environment, I'm a machine, and so that's what I do. You can't live it out.
How come?
Because if she says to you, I love you, you don't interpret that to mean, well, you're excited, your sex glands, lady, are excited by me and how macho I am and handsome I am. No, you interpret that to mean she chooses to love you, don't you? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm freely choosing to care about you, to love you.
In the modern era, since we are the only species who has an evolved brain high enough to think on their own, that we have that free will to say, I love you, regardless of whatever social construct we've depicted.
Okay. What is I when you say, I would say I love you?
Your brain.
Your brain. A chemical reaction?
Absolutely.
Good. Which means there's no you that freely chooses to do anything. It's your chemical reaction that programs you to do whatever it is you're doing, right?
Not create those chemical reactions.
Pardon?
Can you not create or generate those chemical reactions?
Did you create you?
I create my thoughts and my decisions.
I thought your thoughts were just simply the result of the chemicals in your brain organizing in a certain way.
Correct, but if I lift my arm, that is my own decision rather than a mechanical reaction.
Okay, but once again, what do you mean when you say my own decision? There's nothing more than material reality. So when you say, I chose to lift my arm, what I think a more accurate statement from your worldview would be, the chemicals in my mind program me to raise my hand. So I raised it. In other words, there's no I, there's no you, there's no me if there is no God. They're highly complex biochemical reactions, not all of which we understand, obviously. But you see, when you say there is no God, you got to think what that means. It means you are limiting reality to matter and energy. There's no soul, there's no spirit. There's just chemicals, matter, and energy. B.F. Skinner, the great psychologist who taught at Harvard, pointed that out. That's why he taught behaviorism, which is you behave the way you do because of the influences of your environment. Your environment has programmed you to do it, and because of the chemicals in your brain. And that's why there's no you, there's no me there's a complex chemical reaction. And what was fascinating, there was a brilliant MIT student who said, Cliffe, you're absolutely right, but I think that the more science we do, we're going to begin to realize that indeed it is possible for chemicals to create a free will. I strongly disagree. Why? Because if you say there is no God, you are limiting reality. And I'm going to hold you to be consistent with what you say you believe. So if you say there's no God and it's all just chemicals, how can there be a me? How can there be a you? There's an it. I'm an it, and you're an it, and we all are its, but we're not human beings with soul, free will, personhood, love, conscience. It doesn't exist.
I would say that the human dictionary definition of I and me does not have to inquire a soul. So when I refer to myself, I refer to my vessel.
Your vessel.
My vessel, my brain, my own personality.
If there is no God, there's no personal being who created you and gave you the ability to love, a free will, a conscience that enables you to say, this is right and this is wrong. I don't care how many of you guys think abusing an innocent child is right. I'm convinced it's absolutely wrong. And the only way there can be a moral absolute is if there is some mind prior to the human mind who defines right and wrong. Otherwise, majority opinion rules, culture rules, or the intellectual elite, or the guys who have the guns, the power, they rule, and they'll tell us what's right and wrong. And you see, I'm saying my observation of reality is, I don't care how many guns you have behind you, if you're going to try and tell me that to abuse an innocent child is good, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Because I'm convinced that good and evil are not defined by the individual or the power elite or the majority. I'm convinced it's a real value, an intangible, non-physical, non-material value of justice. See, I can't show you a foot of love, right? I can't show you a pound of justice and put it in a test tube and say, okay, here's justice. Those are non-material, non-physical values, aren't they?
Speaking on moral relativity, that concept is highly rejected outside of Christianity as well, because it could possibly be made up from evolution to help with human fitness throughout evolution's process. Now, why do we react different from animals who may kill the weaker? Because we were developed with a brain distinct from different animals. We have the ability to cognitively think. So when it comes to moral relativity, I would insist it is objective, and everyone agrees on that, and it could arrive from evolution rather than a God to be that absolute higher form of morality.
If my brain is simply a highly developed monkey's brain, I'm not going to trust my brain to tell me the truth about reality. See, Einstein was onto something when Einstein said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that we can comprehend it. See, if the universe is an accident, and if my brain is an accident, do you know how unlikely it would be that I, by exercising this brain, could get in touch with the reality of the universe? I mean, that is such a blind leap, it's incredible, Einstein's pointing out. If your brain, well, just think about it this way. Is it more rational to believe that that reason comes from non-reason, or is it more reasonable to believe that reason comes from reason? And an atheist is saying, I believe that reason comes from non-reason. I, as a theist, am saying it's far more reasonable for me to believe that this rational mind comes from a rational mind than it is for me to say reason comes from non-reason.
I would like to insist that I am a Christian, and I'm taking on the thought process of an atheist right now.
Good.
So that atheists can learn from this argument.
Good. Very good.
When it comes to creation, just as you can assume God has no beginning, as he is outside of time, I believe you like to refer to, and perhaps the fourth dimension, you can also insist that if chance were to happen, regardless of how abysmal, given enough time, it is inevitable.
Is it more reasonable? Not can I prove. I can't prove anything. The question for me is not what can you prove. The question for me is what is more reasonable? Is it more reasonable for me to believe that this complex I, which puts that camera to shame, self-assembled by luck? Or is it more reasonable to believe that behind the complexity of this I, it's more reasonable for me to believe there's an intelligent mind? Guys, for me, it's a no-brainer. Why? Because I tried really hard at Davidson College in North Carolina to get a high GPA. I didn't. I tried really hard at Davidson College in North Carolina to play basketball. I just barely made the team. Every game I had a good seat to watch everybody else play. Why? Because to get a ball to go through a hoop that's 10 feet off the ground doesn't happen by accident, guys. It takes amazing thought, amazing coordination to get a little stinking basketball to go through a hoop 10 feet off the ground. And if you've played ball, you know what I'm talking about. And you also know that to get a high GPA doesn't happen by accident. And you don't get A's on exams by just going to the exam and allowing the real you to flow out all of the paper. The real you will flunk. You've got to study and develop your mind to get in touch with reality.
Do you have doubt in God?
Absolutely yes. Every time that I sin, it shows that I doubt. And plus, not just because of my stubborn will, but because of my intellect, I doubt. I've never audibly heard the voice of God. I've never physically touched God. So I've got plenty of doubts at different times. But guess what I've been doing with my doubts? Exactly what I've just been doing with you. I mean, if you have doubts, you can't say, oh, I doubt, therefore God doesn't exist. You can't say, oh, I doubt, therefore Jesus didn't rise from the dead. No, if you've got doubts, be honest and go study the evidence. And if the evidence is there is no God, then don't believe in God, because the evidence doesn't support it. But if the evidence points to God's existence, follow the evidence. Put your faith in him. If the evidence is Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, don't believe he rose from the dead. But if the historical evidence is he really did die, he really was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and 3 days later he really did rise from the dead, and over a period of 40 days he really did appear to over 500 people, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, who saw him risen from the dead, then follow the evidence. I mean, guys, that's the way we live our lives. I don't think you came to OSU because you thought it was the worst university on the planet. I think the majority of you came to OSU because the evidence was it was the best university for you at your academic place in life, in terms of your interests of study. And so the evidence is OSU is good, and that's why you're at OSU. I mean, isn't that the way you guys live your lives? I mean, it's the way I live my life. It's got to be evidence. I can't prove to you that OSU is the best university for you, but the evidence is it's an incredibly fine university, and that's why you're studying here.
I don't understand why it would be such a leap of faith, in your perspective, to follow the Big Bang if you can recognize evidence leading to it just as you can for creation through God. It is almost as if both are buying a lottery ticket when you know the chances are rather good.
Do you think I believe in the Big Bang? I do. Why? Because the evidence is there was a beginning. And that's exactly what the Big Bang is teaching. The Big Bang is saying the universe is not eternal. There is a beginning. Well, that's exactly what I, as a follower of Christ, believe. The universe is not eternal. There was a beginning. Who discovered the Big Bang? George Lemaitre, who was a Belgian Catholic priest, was one of the initial people who described the Big Bang. And when Albert Einstein heard George Lemaitre give a lecture on the Big Bang, Einstein walks out of the lecture saying, that is the most incredible description of the origin of the universe I've ever heard. And Arno Penzias in the 1960s, a brilliant scientist, begins to study background noise of the universe and say, yeah, the Big Bang is true. Well, guess what, guys? Arno Penzias was a committed follower of Christ. So you got two guys who are the chief proponents of discovering and articulating the Big Bang, George Lemaitre and Arno Penzias, who are deeply committed followers of Christ. Now, once again, look at Einstein. Einstein was a pantheist before the Big Bang. He thought that nature is God, that nature is eternal. When he begins to realize, if the Big Bang is true, it means that my pantheism is wrong, the universe is not eternal, the universe is not God, and there is a creator. He was so disturbed by that, he participated in a deception. Mathematically, he proved that the Big Bang could not happen. The only problem was he cheated in his math equation, and he was exposed. And I appreciate Einstein being honest enough to say, you're right. I put that fudge factor into my equation because I knew that if the evidence is the Big Bang took place, there's got to be a God behind it all. There's got to be some type of God, some type of mind. Well, I love it. I love that. It's incredible. I mean, Cliff, you're really weird. You get excited about some pretty weird things, you know. Well, I'm sorry, man. When you look at evidence like that and you watch people try and massage the evidence and change it to suit their worldview, and then they're exposed and they admit it, I mean, gosh, that's pretty exciting.
That's when you know you've won.
Well, and you know that the evidence is consistently some type of God exists. Obviously, the Big Bang says nothing about Jesus, and obviously so many of the parts of the discussion we've been having is more evidence for some type of God, has nothing to do with Jesus at this point. But then obviously the next logical question is, well, who is this God? Who is the Creator? And that's what Jesus claims to be. He claims to be the Creator opening up and revealing who He really is.
Why are people that are schizophrenic, experiencing psychosis, or otherwise severely mentally ill, seemingly the people who, when you talk to them, they identify as like being very religious and having these religious experiences? I think I just struggle with like sometimes separating mental health and spirituality.
Have you read The Three Christs of Ypsilanti? It's actually The Two Christs of Ypsilanti. All right, I would read the book or watch the movie. Richard Gere is in the movie, but I like the book more than the movie. So it's basically two schizophrenics, true story, who think that they are both Jesus Christ. And so what is this?
I've met people like that.
Okay, yeah, so have I. Actually, it's almost like everybody. This atheist said, just because these people think they're Jesus Christ, that's just cultural. It's just cultural Christianity, specific to the US. She is dead wrong. This is true cross-cultural. So even Muslims, oddly enough, when they go psychotic, it's typically they think they're Jesus Christ, not Muhammad. So I think that's some type of evidence actually for the Christian faith. Why is it Jesus that is traveling cross-culturally? Why does every single religion look favorably upon Jesus and no other figure? Every single religion does in different kinds of ways. So specifically with psychoses, when Jesus was going about exorcising demons, I think he was also healing schizophrenics. I don't think he was always just saying, hey, legion, look at endless amounts of demons here, let's cast them out and this person's better. No, in the Greek, there's one specific case scenario where we get kissed by the moon. When someone is going manic or has serious psychoses, oftentimes it's connected to a full moon. With the gravitational pull, psychiatrists don't know exactly why that is, but there's a case to it. How interesting in the Greek, we get talk about Jesus being ahead of his time, a reference to being kissed by the moon, some of these who are supposedly possessed by demons. And so, yes, schizophrenics, a lot of psychoses connects with people who say, I am Jesus Christ, and I think there's a spiritual element in there, which is screaming, there is demonic presence. Because a person becomes so grandiose in saying, I am Christ, that I think the devil gets in there and sadly plays off of that physical pathology and malady, more so than if someone broke a left arm. So we have to leave room to say we don't know exactly what's going on, but I always say, hey, look, if therapy doesn't work, if coping skills like exercise, sociability, all these things don't work, then eventually address that it could be time for an exorcism. And I'm not very charismatic, but I still would say that, because I do think typically a spiritual element is involved. Now, you talked about religiosity. Religiosity is in the DSM as usually a symptom for most mental health disorders, and religiosity is always connected to Pharisees in the New Testament. How interesting. I think all the Pharisees had some type of mental health disorder. They were the ones going around always with the jot and tittle, saying you had to do this, that, and the other. It was an OCD form of psychosis, I think. It was always based out of their own pride and saying you have to follow every single one of the 613 commandments or you're going to hell, or at least you're not spiritually mature. And so religiosity is in the DSM as well.
If people have tried other things, then you think it's time for an exorcism. Is there ever evidence of that removing demons?
Yeah, absolutely. Like peer-reviewed evidence, like in a scientific lab, I don't know of any. It's mainly anecdotal, but it's like thousands and millions. Like you go to Latin America, you go to Haiti, you go to Africa, like everybody's talking about exorcisms, and you see people get a lot better quite quickly. Well, why doesn't that happen as much in the US? Well, I'd say partly because we live in a very scientific age where we say science and medicine, that's all. And so we oftentimes don't try it, and then secondly, we usually discount it. So I think that gets into belief. Some of it's placebo effect, maybe even, right? I'm a big, firm believer in placebo effect. If you believe something's working, things are going to get better. That's peer-reviewed studies for sure, right? There's peer-reviewed studies behind that. Then there's something called the nocebo effect, which is if I don't believe it's going to help, but I'm taking the right medication, Prozac for depression, there's a good chance that Prozac will not help. It's kind of like faith in Christ. If I'm praying and talking to Christ and Jesus says, if you have even just the smallest amount of faith, you can throw a mountain into the heart of the sea. I mean, that's a form of placebo effect based off of evidence though, right? Where you have to believe with your mind and your heart that you can do what Christ is asking or even telling you to do, and you'll be able to do some pretty incredible wonders as well as live out your calling in life. But if you always think, no, I'm always a doubting Thomas, no, Jesus can't use me in that way, well, it's the nocebo effect. Sure, that's going to be a serious weight on your ankle.
Faith is based in evidence.
Yeah.
And like you just said, you were talking about anecdotal evidence. If all of the evidence for Jesus and God is anecdotal, how can we trust that? Because if you look back throughout history, when we rely only on stories that other humans have told, there's a lot left out, or a completely different story is actually the truth. Like, for example, what happened with Christopher Columbus. A lot of people, touted him as a hero, but then as time has gone on and we've looked into what really happened from like other people's accounts, it's come to be known that he and his men did a lot of harm, like physical harm to people and mental harm as well.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, like someone told me that there was 500 witnesses of Jesus. What if someone just wrote that down and decided to tell that story? But did each one of the 500 people write it down, or did one person just like exaggerate, and said 500 people, and then people decided to go with that because they were considered a reliable source? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do I know that those people back then that witnessed Jesus weren't just mentally ill?
All of them mentally ill?
Well, maybe it was like a group of a small amount.
But we know psychologically you can't have group hallucination of something like a resurrection. It would have to be single hallucination. Not everybody was hallucinating when they encountered the risen Jesus Christ. Medically that doesn't happen, right? Group hallucinations.
I just don't understand how we can trust that that is the truth. Like, history books aren't necessarily true.
What is the movie Tom Hanks is in where he gets the picture with the president and it turns out to be totally falsifiable. I mean, thank you, Forrest Gump. Everything can be completely falsified with a picture. We see it with AI in this day and age. I would trust eyewitness testimony, which is still considered the top line of evidence in the court of law, way before a picture. Like way before. I would trust DNA evidence way before a picture. And so what you get in the Gospels is eyewitness testimony. And so any good detective, any good lawyer is going straight to eyewitness testimony before any form of picture or anything like that. And so what you have in the Gospels is eyewitness reportage, testimony, not eyewitness legend that somehow springs up over time. No, historically speaking, you have footnotes even within the Gospels. Talk to Malchus, talk to Alexander and Rufus, talk to all these different people who are named because they were well known in the community. Go to them and see if this really happened. Or Paul saying to Agrippa, for example, you know these things didn't happen in a corner. Check out the evidence with the resurrection. So you have all these people who are evidentialists. They're not saying gullibly blindly believe. They're saying go check it out yourself. You know, Theophilus, for example, getting told by the doctor Luke, well known in the community. He's saying these aren't cleverly invented stories. I checked them out myself. Now you go check them out. Don't just trust me and my word for it. Or John at the end of the Gospel of John. Hey, I've written about a lot of things, checked a lot of things out. There could be endless amounts of books that are filled up by the evidence and things that Jesus actually did. But I don't have all the time in the world to talk about every single story. And so eyewitness testimony led to a type of oral tradition where we know that the spoken word, memorization of things like parables, of things like the way Jesus spoke, iambic pentameter, I think it's called, all these different things, the way he spoke, that was carried on in a very judicious way that had a ton of credibility behind it. And then when the disciples started to die off, that's when they had to put pen to paper.
When I was raised, my parents are like, oh, the Bible is basically just like another novel, you know, like like a fiction book. Like,
you can say it's wrong, history, but it's not written as fiction. One of the greatest authors and literary critics in our time, C.S. Lewis, said that. He said, you can't look at the Gospels and say, oh, it's fiction. No, it won't let you do that. It's written as history. Now, you can say it's wrong history, but you can't say it's Aesop's fables because it's written in an entirely different way. It's written about a historical figure making historical claims, historically falsifiable to say, if you can prove that the resurrection didn't happen, well, then obviously the entire faith breaks down. Paul says that in numerous places. He says we are to be pitied the most. He said that we are completely foolish and ridiculous in our thinking of faith and who Jesus is if the resurrection didn't occur. So I would ask your parents to check out the resurrection, and then I'd really press them on, all right, Mom and Dad, this is all just made up. How historically then, throw out the Bible, throw out all the historical documentation that, by the way, if there wasn't a supernatural element to it, every great historian says that there's more reliability and evidence for things like who Jesus is and his resurrection, bar none, than any other ancient history. Way more evidence for it. But there's a supernatural element, so you got to discount it. Okay, that's embarrassing. That's holding a level of skepticism that I think is too stringent, too strong. You have to come to a historical document and say, I'm completely open. Yes, there's a supernatural element, so I'm going to have one eyebrow up a little bit, but I'm not just going to throw it out. No, if I believe that there could be a God who created this whole place, then I could certainly believe that if he graced this planet, he could be raised from the dead. I mean, he's God. He created this whole place. He created every single human being. He certainly has control of whether a life is in the ground, dead, or alive. And so I'd press your parents on, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry, that's just completely wrong to think it's fiction, but you could be right if it's made up history. But then, finally, okay, if it's made up history, you need to tell me then why almost 2/3 of the entire Roman Empire were hoodwinked overnight. Why thousands upon thousands of Jews became Christians, who would be the last ones to become Christians on the planet, overnight, and then were willing to die for that faith.